They gathered in the shadows. Craftsmen, tradesmen, quiet patriots, rising up not with cannon and muskets, but with ink, pamphlets, and midnight meetings. Their cause? To challenge a distant empire, to say to king and parliament, "We will not be taxed without our voice." They called themselves the Sons of Liberty. Their defiance would spark a revolution. Their story is grit, risk, hope, and the forging of a nation. Tonight we journey into the hidden heartbeat of rebellion. Seeds of dissent. In the years after the French and Indian War, Britain turned to its American colonies to pay the price of empire. Taxes were raised, troops stationed. Colonists watched as their rights, they believed, were being stripped away. Into this tense atmosphere emerged a group of men unwilling to be silent. The Sons of Liberty, though loosely organized, began to take shape. Merchants in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, they whispered, plotted, published. They placed the phrase, "No taxation without representation," into the heart of colonial resistance. They met beneath elm trees, in taverns, on cobblestones. Their gatherings resembled more than protest. They were community, purpose, identity. These men did not yet fire a shot. They used words, symbols, defiance. But in quiet offices, in front of stamp distributors' homes, the future was being shaped. When the Stamp Act arrived in 1765, the Sons of Liberty stepped into the forefront. It was one thing to complain, it was another to act. Their actions would force Britain to listen. Their voices would echo through the halls of empire. And so begins the story of a band of men who dared to believe freedom was not a privilege, but a right.
The unity of rebellion.
What started as local resistance spread like wildfire. The Sons of Liberty did not remain confined to one town. They coordinated between colonies. New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, each had its affiliates. Committees corresponded. Word traveled across harbors, over tavern tables, through letters. The men of the Sons of Liberty realized that British acts were not isolated. They were part of a system disregarding colonial voices. So they organized non-importation agreements, boycotts of British goods, and public protests. The Liberty Tree and the Liberty Pole became rallying symbols. In Boston, the Loyal Nine, precursors to the Sons, hanged effigies of officials who enforced unpopular laws. The tactics were sometimes crude, sometimes violent, sometimes theatrical. But behind the drama was conviction. They were claiming a place in history. Their purpose, not mere complaint, but transformation. To hold power to account. And as the movement grew, so did the weight of what they carried. What they did in one colony resonated in another. What one town celebrated or condemned, another watched and learned. The Sons of Liberty were no longer a secret. They were a warning. They were a challenge. And Britain would respond.
The Stamp Act storm.
March 22nd, 1765. The Stamp Act comes into force. Every piece of paper, every legal document, every playing card, now taxed. The colonies braced, and the Sons of Liberty acted. In Boston, the uproar was immediate. A distributor of stamps was hung in effigy, his office ransacked, his home threatened. The Liberty Tree stood witness as thousands gathered. The message was clear: we will not accept this. In New York, protests erupted. The name Sons of Liberty began to be used as a banner under which resistance coalesced. The act, far from securing British revenue, ignited colonial fury. Isolated policies became flashpoints. The words of taxation without representation echoed in drawing rooms and taverns alike. And the Sons of Liberty stood at the heart of that echo. They were still not an official army. They were not uniformed. But they were visible. They were organized. They were dangerous to the status quo. Their activity would force the Stamp Act's repeal. But it would also set a course toward greater conflict. The rebellion felt latent. The Sons of Liberty were the spark.
Escalation and defiance.
The victories were swift, but the tensions deeper. After the Stamp Act repeal came more burdens, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act. The Sons of Liberty moved from protests to provocations. In Boston, they armed boycotts, attacked tax-collecting operations, tarred and feathered agents. They boycotted British goods until shops complied or closed. They forged allies among smugglers, printers, ordinary colonists. The colonial press became their megaphone. The British responded with troops. The customs houses became battlegrounds. A lit candle turned into a forest fire. In 1770, the Boston Massacre erupted, British soldiers firing into a crowd of colonists. The Sons of Liberty would use that moment as propaganda, as proof of tyranny. Paul Revere's engravings spread their message far and wide. The rules of engagement had changed. The Sons of Liberty were no longer purely clandestine. They occupied the moral high ground, but they also embraced the shadows of vigilantism. They pushed the boundaries of protest, and in doing so they brought the colonies closer to rebellion.
The Boston Tea Party.
December 16, 1773. Boston Harbor. 3 ships at anchor: Dartmouth, Eleanor, Beaver. They carry the tea of the British East India Company. The Tea Act is the provocation. The Sons of Liberty Act. Disguised as Mohawk-clad men, they board the ships at night, hurling 342 chests of tea into the cold water. The value, nearly $2 million in today's money. Not vandalism, but defiance. The act shouts, "No longer will we pay for your debts, for your monopolies, for your disregard of our rights." The British retaliate. The coercive acts close Boston Harbor, suspend self-rule in Massachusetts, quarter troops in homes. The Sons of Liberty have turned a protest into a flashpoint. The colonies now stand at a crossroads. There is no turning back. Their act of dumping tea is a storm signal. The fight, not just over taxes, but over identity, justice, power. And in the wake of the Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty solidify their place in history.
From protest to war.
The Sons of Liberty, once shadowy protesters, became the heart of a revolution. As the Continental crisis deepened, their networks spread. Committees of correspondence, militia groups, propaganda machines. They rallied colonists to arms, to boycott, to resist. Their legacy runs through the first shots at Lexington and Concord. But beyond battles, they changed minds. Their symbols, Liberty Tree, Liberty Pole, Liberty Flag, became icons. Their message, the worth of freedom, the danger of tyranny. And yet the war ahead would demand more. The Sons of Liberty, with their unconventional methods, paved the way. They encouraged ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen, sailors, to believe their voices mattered. The battlefield was not just fields and forests. It was hearts and minds. The war would test the ideas they planted: equality, representation, sacrifice. And as the war approached, some Sons of Liberty traded their hoods for uniforms. Their tools changed, but the spirit remained. The protesters had become revolutionaries.
Legacy of action.
The war ended. A new nation emerged. But what of the Sons of Liberty? Their work did not vanish with the peace. Chapters in New York and elsewhere morphed into political organizations. Their methods, public mobilization, newsprint, symbols of freedom, became part of American political culture. Yet their legacy is mixed. Some look back and call their tactics violence. Others call them necessary. The creed they espoused, representation, liberty, self-governance, became foundational. But across society, divisions remained. Loyalists versus patriots, colonists versus crown, freedom versus profit. The Sons of Liberty lived in that tension. They helped spark a revolution, but they also forced a rethinking of how power works. They remind us that protest, when rooted in principle, can become change. They remind us that freedom is not passive. It demands engagement. And they remind us that history is shaped by ordinary men choosing to act. Their names may fade. Their actions echo.
Echoes in today's freedom.
We live in a world shaped by the decisions of those long gone. The Sons of Liberty were one of those decisions. Their protest echoes in modern debates over representation, taxation, civil disobedience. When citizens organize, speak out, rally for rights, they walk the ground they first trod. The Liberty Tree may be gone, the chests of tea may be sunk, but the idea remains that people have power, that voices matter, that freedom must be maintained. As you watch this story, remember, the Sons of Liberty were not perfect. They were flawed men doing bold work. They remind us that change asks more than anger. It asks commitment. They show that symbols matter, trees matter, flags matter, that gathering matters, and yes, actions matter. In quietly joining causes, in speaking when no one else will, that is the echo. That is their gift. And now the spotlight shifts. The question is not, what did they do? But what will you do?